Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Sunday Times GenNext digitized conversation series. Today, we're discussing something incredibly exciting as a part of our discussion series in partnership with Party South African and Yellowwood. We have the great advantage of talking about loving local brands and how to resonate with youth. And shortly, I will introduce you to our three panelists who are no doubt people who are going to offer an immense amount of insight. And I'm really excited to actually be having this discussion with them. Before I can get to that, though, I need to just say a huge thank you to our partners for today. We are partnering with Party South Africa and, of course, Yellowwood, who is the research partner for the Sunday Times GenNext study. And so we've had a couple of these discussions. We know that the GenNext study is in its 17th year, and we've been immensely focused on articulating how do we get good at speaking to youth, how do we work at resonating with youth. And today's discussion is specifically focused on South African brands. And so I think we can probably all attest to the fact that every generation of South Africa's youth has their own almost era of brands, right? Speak to people and they'll tell you about Black Like Me and how that brand represented who they were. At some stage, we had brands like Lokshin Culture, who were a representation of what South African youth really felt. At some stage, we actually also had even brands like Toughies, who represented who we were as young people. And if you fast forward that to some of the advertising space, you've got brands like Omo and Rama, and in most recent years, the likes of Chicken Licken and Nando's, who really represent the spirit of what youth in South Africa look like. And the three people we have talking to us today are going to help us discuss the span of the discussion from us as consumers, the everyday person, and I'll introduce you to them shortly. Then we're going to talk quite a bit about shaping what a South African product actually looks like. And then, of course, the advertisers, who are a big part of shaping our opinions and our narratives about who we are as a people. So to that point, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. So we've got Siyabonga Zungu, who's the brand manager for Party South Africa, who probably has one of the most enviable jobs in the country, to basically get to be the person who encourages all of us to be as proud of ourselves as we ought to be. We've got Sky O'Leary, who is a young professional, and she represents the Yellowwood J Bodders, which is a junior board of directors. We've got Thea Baloyi, who's the founder of Batu Shoes, who is probably one South African who is on everyone's lips these days. And then we've got Mike Sharman, who seems to have taken the term viral and given it a completely new meaning, and we'll be talking to him. He's the founder of Retroviral Digital. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. I am, as you can tell, I'm delighted. I really am excited about this. It's rare that we get to talk about South Africa and to talk about it in the most positive light. So I think let's get started. I think that's all the setup we need. And what I'll do is I'll start right off with you, Sia, as our custodian and the flagship of what we are about as South Africa. Can you give us, in the context of what South Africa's local brands are about, how do you believe they have actually positioned themselves in the minds of young consumers? And where might some of the opportunities lie for these brands?
I think thank you once again for having us today. I think once again, I think the big thing with brands lately is the awareness of culture and understanding of where we are right now as a country. It's embracing of our heritage and who we are and how we speak, how we talk, how we play, how we dance, how we laugh at each other. And brands have now seen the importance of being more South African when you're speaking to a South African audience. So more of that has been happening, and more of the understanding that there is quality when it comes to South African products and brands, and there's the importance of relaying that message to the consumer and getting away from that misnomer of international is the way to go and local is not lekker. So I think more and more we've seen that brands are affiliating with South Africa and resonating with South African consumers and speaking that language that they can understand as well as adopt and relate to it. With regards to how we can, the second part of the question, I think the most important aspect is purpose. Brands must have a purpose, and consumers in a youth perspective have something that they stand for and live for and believe in. And I think brands that resonate with that speak very well to consumers. Brands that understand being consistent and reliable, consistent in their messaging. They don't chop and change who they are, and they don't change their identity. People want to resonate with a brand. They want to identify and have an expectation to what brands are. And I think all these elements have assisted in brands in South Africa growing, and also assisted in them in networking, communicating with the consumer, especially now with the advent of digital marketing and social media. There's an interaction and a one-on-one engagement that brands are able to have now with consumers directly.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I find really intriguing, and I want to throw the next question forward to Sky, is you talk a lot about brands being consistent, being clear in their message. But for me, the idea of being youth is partly the ability to be able to change your mind every other day, right? You can start off one day as being incredibly pop influenced. The next day, you're very serious and incredibly deep and current affairs obsessed. And the day after that, you actually don't care about anything and you're completely apathetic. Also, what I find interesting is, Sky, maybe you can give us a little bit of context, is what is it that about South African brands that resonates with you as a young person? And I expect, and maybe I'm projecting here, that you are an evolving young person.
So I definitely agree with a lot of what Sia said in terms of, the purpose and being consistent. But I think that I can't answer that question without making reference to the context of the circumstances that we find ourselves in now. So, COVID-19 brought on this massive hurdle that's put a massive block in young people's path to their path to succeed in the livelihoods that they want to succeed in. And I think, we have this unemployment rate of, within my age group, of like 74%, and it doesn't get really much better when you go up to 25 to 34, when 51% of people are unemployed. But not to look at those negatives, the stats are there, they're gloomy, but what's interesting about young people is that they are extremely aspirational, and being like unsheltered to these global crises that we find, around the world and locally. We have this like collective determination to be on our path, to not kind of approach that hurdle and go over it, but to create our own path and detour from it. And I think what brands need to do is they need to realize that you're either going to be with me as a young person on my new path to success, or you're going to get in my way and you're going to cause friction, and then I'm going to cut you out of my life. So I think obviously when it comes to who resonates with me, there's brands who resonate for various different reasons, but brands need to always be cognizant of the current circumstances of young people, and then to more closely to who they are providing their service or their products to, then be cognizant of those people's realities. So aside from COVID and the challenges we find now, I think as a young person, for instance, young people are living in a world now where, global environmental issues are massive, and me as a consumer who wants to be more sustainable, more conscious of like the ethical choices of brands that are open and transparent about that, they're helping me live to that standard, that lifestyle that I want to live by. So that's an aspect of more of my reality, but I think they need to always consider the larger circumstances that younger people find themselves in now, because if you're not resonating with our circumstances, it tells me that you're not on the ground and you're not in touch with like the culture as it is now. Yeah.
All right. So I think it's really interesting that you're saying that, because Theo is probably one of the few people in this country who seems to be defying the odds, right? Theo, I think everything we've seen about the Batu brand so far is almost a triumph in spite of everything that we're experiencing and what Sky is talking about. Can you give us a little bit of insight of how are you, in the way that you're building and shaping the Batu brand, resonating with young people, especially in these current tough economic times? Are there unique things that you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, we as a business, as a brand, we're very intentional about what is it that we want to build and how we want to build it, I mean, our mission to reignite hope and create sustainable jobs, irrespective of, the economic times we find ourselves in favor of trade or unfavorable of trade. We always want to, walk the journey with our people and tell stories that, I think African consumers can proudly affiliate with. Sia, earlier on mentioned about, brands have to start embodying and accommodating or incorporating, the African heritage into either product or service offering, or even embodying it into value chains and products that we, offer our consumers. And I think that's one thing that I want to do, or we want to do as a brand, to really connect with the people who are on the ground, irrespective of what's really happening in the economy, just to inspire, our consumers to walk their journey, because, and we're not only saying, they should walk their journey, but we're also telling our story to say, this is how we've walked our journey in a room in Alex, to build the business that we are today. And this is the impact that we make in our community. And then if you've got a desire to be of service, to your community, you've got, dreams that you want to chase, and yes, COVID has hit us badly, in economically, but if you don't give up, you just need to continue walking your journey. And there's a story of, I think a story of hope more than anything, and a story of inspiration. And we want to do that with our shoes, to, all the other consumers out there, and the beauty about it is that it's not a story that is from, New York, Silicon Valley. It's a story that comes from a very, I think, poverty-stricken township, being Alexander Township, which a lot of people can resonate with, I think the economic circumstances, the economic climate in our, I think, in South African township economy. And we are that brand saying we come from, where a lot of us come from. We know how it feels like to be brought up in those, but this is what we've built in our business, and we want to walk that journey with you. Either your dream is to become a doctor, but you're probably not securing a bursary, or either you want to be, a CA one day, but the internships are not coming through. Your parents can't afford to, pay your tuition fees. We are that brand that is there for you, and we even further communicate that brand promise with our CS project, which we just launched a few weeks ago, which is the Batu for Batu Care project that amplifies our brand promise of walking the journey. And in this, with the objective, with our leaders, and we are that brand that is, I think, consumer conscious, and we want to tell a proudly African story, because Batu is a story that has existed in South Africa for for centuries, and we want to resonate with the consumers. And to answer your question, we do that in different means, either with our service offering, either through customization. You want to put a proudly South African logo on your sneakers. We are able to accommodate that. You want to buy a pair, for your dad, for Father's Day, just to thank your dad for what they have done, in your life. You can customize that story on your shoes, and we are that brand that is tailor-made, to consumers' needs.
I love the idea of customizing your story in the shoe, which is something that I think is rare for South Africans to be able to do, right? The fact that we can own our narrative. And I think when you're pointing to what Sia was talking about, that awareness of culture, it seems like a big part of it that certainly South African audiences are doing, and Africans in general, is insisting that our story be told by us. And I want to talk then to a storyteller. Mike, you've been in advertising, and advertising is the world of shaping narratives and helping us tell the stories that we understand about ourselves and the people around us. How is it that advertising should actually respond to young people, firstly? And maybe just the second part of it is navigating the space of an evolving audience with the evolving narrative, because South Africa hasn't always necessarily been this story. How do you manage those two things as an advertiser?
I think advertising can be a bit of a dirty word when you think about the way in which some brands try to force feed their message down people's throats. And I think if you look at the people that are on the call today, I think the key message that's really coming out is like this authenticity. Like I love following Theo's hustle, because every time he opens a new store, you want to cheer for him, whether you're seeing the post on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever it may be. And I think that's ultimately where good advertisers distinguish themselves from the mediocre. And I think with all situations, there's always like an 80-20. So 80% of advertising is going to be mediocre, and then that 20% needs to cut through the clutter. And I think that the reality is that industry as an umbrella term is such a broad thing. Me as a digital marketer, even digital has such extremes in terms of, are you an SEO specialist? Are you a social media specialist? Like, what do all these things mean? And I think the fascinating thing and the research that we've been exposed to over the last year really talks to, Sky spoke about purpose previously. And I think what people want, what consumers want, regardless of demographics. We personally like to really tap into psychographics. I think demographics is outdated. It looks very much at boxing people as opposed to really tapping into the headspace of where they're at, and the affluence and all those different elements that drive that aspiration for specific brands. And I think what people really want is they want a brand that feels human. They want a brand that is making a difference to communities. We have hardships, we have challenges, and I think the reality is that ultimately we can't rely on other people to fix our own problems and our own surroundings. Like if we invest in our own change and making an upliftment, where there is a brand that fixes your potholes in your street, like there's a greater chance that you're going to be more affiliated with that offering. And I think that's ultimately what we want. We want to go back to a place of community. Once again, I'll use Theo as an example. You see how a community rises to support when a new store opens, when he ticks over a new number. And I think that's ultimately, when you're telling a story, it's not about painting it and making it seem perfect. Sometimes people just want the warts and all reality of the highs and the peaks and the troughs, right?
True. That is very true. You're making me really think about this idea of the South Africanness of a story. Right? And maybe, Sia, you can weigh in on this a little bit. I find it intriguing that whenever we do talk about the notion of being proudly South African, the story of our people and our brands, we talk often about the optimism, right? And I think Mike is touching on some of the things that are a little bit awkward in our story. Brands have to contend with what is imperfect in our story. Whether you're a luxury brand or you're a mass market brand, how do you manage and how do you create pride around this idea of being South African without always having to deal with the hardships of it? Do you have an opinion about how we should manage that perception of local, not necessarily meaning difficult?
Yeah, I think our journey as a country has been one of a tough time, but now almost going into like your teenage years where you're identifying and finding yourself. So when we got our freedom in '94, you find that we're very different and we don't understand each other's cultures and we don't have a unifying force behind us. And as time has gone forward, we've realized that there's similarities in our differences. There's unifying factors that show that we as South Africans and as a people, we identify with each other and we also relate ourselves to each other's stories. And I think as Mike was mentioning, people like Theo and Batu and Matosa and all these other brands that are telling our stories on an international level are giving us something to unify for. They're giving us something that's relatable and understandable. And sometimes we want to see a Theo on the big stage because it shows that a Sia can do something like that. It shows that a Sky can start a business and be successful. So what the pride part of it is that we need to see ourselves in these big stages. We need to see ourselves as worthy. And we had a difficult time. And if you say we're going to have a difficult conversation, we need to have a difficult conversation of how we project and see ourselves and how we see ourselves, how we see our brands. For a long time, you'd have situations where when something is South African, it's seen to be less of a quality or it's not good enough. It's not competitive with the international product. But now we're getting to this point where we need to identify with the idea that we do create great global products. There's so many South African products or South African made products that are on the global stage, from car companies, from your Toyotas, but there's brands that are consistently exporting the South African narrative. And what we need to change as a people is not waiting for the affirmation from international audiences and customers, but appreciate our own things while they're still here. We do not have to wait for Trevor Noah to be in America for us to celebrate him as a success story. We can celebrate him as he grows now. And I think what Mike said is very important. Let's celebrate every store that Theo opens. Let's celebrate every new brand that comes up. I remember back a while ago on social media, there was a big issue with Tsepo jeans and why is he naming his jeans after his name? But there's no issue when you have a Louis Vuitton and you have a Gucci. These are people's names. And I think we need to have pride in who we are and how we stand and not wait for affirmation. I think, and that's where we will showcase our greatness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, let me stay with you a little bit, Sia, because I think some of the things that you're touching on are certainly what the digital platforms enable us to actually be able to do, right? So you talk about how the way that a South African brand is able to show up internationally is partly because we now have digital engagement platforms. So I wonder if you've got a view in terms of what engagement platforms local brands should be using to compete, right? How do I take on a global name brand with my own name brand in a way that makes me seem equal to the task?
I think the greatest weapon that we have in this global battlefield of brands is that no one can tell a Batu story better than a South African. No one can tell Trevor Noah's story more than a South African. So we need to start celebrating that and use platforms that engage in that. Tell our story, create our content, use the people that represent your brand, use the stories that you've grown up with, because those are stories that the world wants to hear. And I think platforms such as digital marketing and social media are those platforms. They kind of cut out, if you look at the traditional marketing space, you used to need to have a big budget to get your brand across. Now you can open a social media account for free and start engaging with consumers and start putting content out there, creating an audience, but also engaging in such a way that it's relevant to the audience that is receiving the information. And that's what brands are needing to do. And I think those kind of platforms have helped bridge the gap that essentially in the past, if you I don't want to expose my age, but if you look at back in the days of magazines and so forth, you only get the content, you only get the content of the brands that have the budget to showcase the adverts. You only get the nostalgia, and it's so far away. You know, sometimes when something is far away, it creates like a luxury and elusiveness to it. But now brands are in touch point. You can see a Theo. You can go to a mall and say, here's a Theo, here's a Makosa, here's the people who represent us, and they can engage with you guys on certain social media platforms and digital platforms. It's affordable. It crosses the bridge of what we've had with traditional marketing, where you needed a big budget to get your message across to more people. So I think digital marketing is what is very important for brands to utilize to get their message across, especially smaller brands that want to compete on that platform, you know? And I think that's the best channel currently that we can use, especially with the lockdown and COVID, bringing more people into the tech space and using their phones and their computers and so forth.
Absolutely. So Sky, perhaps you might be able to give us a perspective on this, because I think the rest of us spend a lot of time trying to push messaging to people. Collectively, I guess we're advertisers and influencers of opinion. How do you receive these efforts, these digital marketing efforts, whether they be pop-up ads or influencer marketing? Are they working for you, or do you kind of just click and move on?
So I definitely think there's a mix of both, where we know today that it's heavily cluttered in the digital space. So there are definitely moments where, I've searched something online and then I'm on my phone and then there's these pop-ups and I'm kind of like, I wasn't actually looking for that, but now you're intruding my space. So there is that aspect of it. But I want to tap into especially what Theo said about, the whole storytelling aspects, and from a local brand perspective, being able to tell our story and portraying that over. I think that's what that's certainly what I really started to fall in love with, because even like looking at Theo's story, go and look at the whole story. Even Tepo Jeans, I did some research on him a while back, and when you read the story, people resonate with people, and it creates this like person behind the brand. And I think that is what people kind of connect to. So when it comes to influencer marketing, I think, again, it's the same thing. There's a fine line with influencer where I sometimes think that brands maybe jump to an influencer because it can like create a lot of talkability. But I think that influencer, their story should align with the story of the brand again. And you shouldn't just jump at certain people. I'll give an example just in terms of like Siya Kolisi. So he's an amazing influential person and, big boom a while back. And we found a lot of brands latching onto him, and I think it got quite a lot, like suddenly you were seeing him attached to every second brand. And then it's not that he loses authenticity, it just doesn't have the same impact because there's not that much of that connection, So I think in a digital space, it is tough to cut through the clutter, but I think local brands telling their story, because the story is also kind of the story of this culture of entrepreneurship, which is incredible. And I think if brands, the like of Theo and stuff, start telling that story, it gives, like you're saying, hope to other South Africans that, yes, this is our story, and yes, we do have the platform to grow it here. Yeah.
I think you make a really great example, I think, about that tension between what brands bring to a story sometimes, and sometimes perhaps what maybe they take away, right? And it's kind of, I say that with a lump in my throat about Siya Kolisi because we all love him so much. But it's an interesting balance to watch right now, right? To see him be a part of how his success is absolutely what we all want for ourselves and for the people who are aspiring to do great things. But that idea of where the line between what's authentic and what's real to him versus what brands are trying to do and explain through him. Yeah. So I wonder, I wonder.
One more thing. I think even on that point, it's like how sometimes you see international brands, because they have the massive marketing spend to do it, you see them really jumping at global trends, and with pride and this and that, and it's great. But I appreciate the authenticity of local brands, because sometimes they just stick to like what is relevant to their local community and where am I doing it there, if that makes sense. It's not chopping and changing to the global trends to fit what the consumer wants to see in the messaging, because sometimes you start to question, is that for profitable gain, or is that what you truly believe in? Is that what you're instilling in your organization? So yeah, there's definitely fine lines.
There really is. Thea, I wonder if you can maybe give us a sense of how you're walking that fine line. Of course, recently we're seeing a big increase in some of the advertising, the above the line advertising from the Batu brand. How do you make your brand stand out around so much content, both online and social media and in out-of-home advertising? What is your team focusing on, or certainly what are you asking them to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we try to be very creative and innovative, and most importantly, intentional in as to what we communicate out there. Either it's out of home advertising or it's just digital advertising. We really want to speak to the same client that walks into the Batu store, and we really want to talk to that reason why they come into the Batu store. So data is very important in this era. It's one thing to say, I want to speak to Theo, but how do you continuously speak to Theo? So it's very important for us, and I think that's why for us in our business, we've decided to own the end-to-end value chain, from the means of production to how we do our supply chain distribution, how we warehouse our products, and most importantly, how we exclusively sell Batu at Batu stores. Because when a Theo comes in to buy Batu, we can be able to get that data and be able to communicate and reach out to him in many other means. And we try to be different by being authentic. Everything else that we do in our business is very much informed. And especially with the idea of building, or with the vision of building, a shoe brand that Africans can proudly affiliate with, we try to be authentic across all the LSMs, irrespective of who's playing in the real economy, who's not playing in the real economy. We want to be visible, and that is why we went with the CSI project. And as much as it's more about creating impact in the community, but if a Theo Baloyi, who's in grade 2, wears the Batu school shoes, and Batu keeps on coming back, year after year, giving them shoes, that's the brand that will, come unconsciously or subconsciously in their mind, and that will always be there in their everyday life. And to that Theo that is obviously traveling between the big highways, are going to work, we want to be visible to that audience as well, and to that consumer, and speak the same language. And I think in terms of content, we try to be different by literally communicating our USP, of the business, and the unique selling proposition of our products, consistently. So we never change our messaging. Like Sky said, we really try to change our messaging to fit to the global trends or what's trending in the country and so forth. We want to be authentic and be able to connect to the same consumer over and over again, because if we have repetitive customers, they can be able to be our brand advocates, because they've really I think consumed our quality, they've consumed our story, they've consumed our service, and those are the best people to really grow our business and communicate and be brand advocates of our brand, as opposed to someone who's in a paid partnership and they only do 3 posts and they don't constantly speak about the same thing, then jump onto the next brand and do another paid partnership. But if we can focus on that one consumer and communicate to them our USP, communicate our quality, communicate our story authentically, they will be able to live our brand, not only talk about it, but live it out. And other people will see it in them, and that will be able, to bring more clients into our business. And that's how we try to do it differently. We want to be very much engaged with the people who, I think, authentic consumers of Batu, the true fans of Batu, and really build that community and keep on growing it so that they can pass it on to other consumers.
That's really great. I really want to get into this discussion a bit more, because I think we're getting to the crux of the difference between branding yourself South African and creating a South African brand. And so, Mike, I want to just invite you a little bit, when maybe you can give us some of your expertise. In your opinion, what's the extent to which things like representation contributes to helping people make a choice about a brand? So we're talking a lot about authenticity. Is there something in the selection of the music, the faces, the language, the way that local brands represent themselves that you believe influences consumers? And then the second part of my question is, are there South African ads or ad campaigns that you believe are getting this right?
I have so many things I've been wanting to jump up and get excited about and contribute to, because I think that there have been so many points. I'm going to digress a little bit first and then come back to that question, because I think that ultimately, advertising, when it works best, is like a mirror of our consumers. Like we as a consumer, we see ourselves in those specific stories. And I think influence is something that Sky touched on, and something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I feel like too many brands are lazy. Like the Sia Khaleesi example is exactly it. It's an easy choice because Sia's top of mind and we want to tell that story. But for us, we always prefer to zig when the other brand agencies are zagging. So for example, we've been creating the series of People and Power Tools That Won't Quit series for Ryobi over the last couple of years. They supported Kirsten Landman, who became the first African woman to finish Dakar on a motorbike, and she subsequently podiumed. And then after that did so well, we said we want to tell a story about Eastern Cape rugby, because I heard such amazing insights and information from a friend of mine, Spu Majigiliso, who's the deputy editor of Sport 24. So we went to Ryobi and said, we want to tell the Mapimpi story, because it's the complete opposite of what any other brand is going to do. Mapimpi, his Xhosa is much better than his English. So we said, let's tell a docu in Xhosa. Like, let's do something completely different. Let's use subtitles. We got the director of Dinner Samizi's, Bongani Morgan. He directed it. Spu, as our journalist, was like the narrator. And obviously, I can't speak Xhosa. So what is the point of me going and interviewing people in that region? It doesn't fit. So excited because that story is going to be airing in July. And I think the reality around influencers is like, there's so many options to choose from. There's so many ways that you can almost use your brand through other people as a conduit, but you always run the risk of them doing something stupid because they are human. So when you invest in an influencer, the thing about Theo, if he's stupid, he ruins his whole business, but he's effectively built himself as the influencer there. And for me, so many textbooks and MBA workshops will tell you, don't become key man dependent, don't invest in one person, but that's absolute rubbish. Because if you think about the greatest businesses in the world, they all have a figurehead. The Jobs of the world, the Bransons, the Beloys, like they have a figurehead that then can distill into your actual tangible feeling. So like when Steve Jobs passed, now Tim Cook is the figurehead, but all that stuff that Jobs invested in the brand building over those years is now kind of permeated into the way that they deliver on their product and the expectation from the customer. So I think that's, for me, is a very important addition to some of the previous comments. And I think that, to your point about representation, is that it's fine to be able to segment your audience and be able to target them, but people do, ultimately, they want to look at a story and they want to buy into it. I always love that example of The Lion King. That's an African story, yet it was told by Disney, you know, and there's so many nuances that are missed because we as Africans are missing out on the opportunity to tell our own stories. And I think that's what's exciting about this panel, is we're showing that there's a hunger, there's a want, there's a need, and the nuances, not just across our country, but across the continent, are so varied that once we take a stand and we're brave to authentically deliver our own version of events, people want that. They want to buy into it. And I think that we're seeing that in the panel today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right about that element of authenticity, but I'm going to get you back to the question I asked you because I need an answer to it. I need you to help me understand to what extent the idea of using that representation gives local brands an advantage. Because I'm trying to get to grips with some practical things that smaller brands can use in their leverage. They don't have the big names. They don't have the fighting power and the marketing muscle. What are the tools that people can use to kind of shape that authenticity, that resonance that we keep talking about?
For me, I think it's the importance of the team, right? Like we're a small agency, and having worked with some really good founders over the years, what I've realized is that the strength of your output is based on that initial strategic point and the people that you are bouncing your ideas off. I use this analogy of stand-up comedy. Trevor Noah, perfect example. Sia's referenced him before. Sia has a team of something like 24 writers now that he's on The Daily Show. And it gives you as a writer, the greatest comedians in the world, the Chris Rocks, the Jerry Seinfelds, whoever you may or may not like in the comedic world, they bounce their comedy off one another. They will never just write comedy, because the problem is every idea in your head sounds perfect. And a similar situation in my agency, if I come up with an idea, if my creative director comes up with an idea, if a designer, community manager comes up with an idea, we will bounce that off each other, either on our office WhatsApp group or in the old world when you were in an office. But ultimately, you have to create the safety and the trust where someone can turn around and go like, yo, Mike, that idea sounds like an old white guy, like you've completely missed it. Or, hey, that is too nuanced that your audience isn't going to get it. And I think you only start really creating true conversations and communication opportunities when you can bounce ideas off a team of very diverse people. And that is, it's difficult because, it's hard to be vulnerable. But my team knows that we can debate anything. We can debate politics, sexual orientation, we can debate creative, we can debate race. And that's all important. That's important stuff to do, because if my idea sounds too white, it's going to miss the mark with the majority of the population.
Yeah, I totally get you. Now, assuming that somehow Mike's magic formula has worked and people have stress tested each other, and they've made sure that they're speaking to the most South African version of it. Sky, I wonder if you can give me a sense, which brands have kind of left a kind of memorable imprint for you, and what about those brands? Has it been in the way that they've orchestrated their message? Is it social consciousness? Is it packaging? Is it the product itself? Like what in the mix of what Mike is talking about has delivered well for you?
So definitely a vary of things depending on the brand. So for instance, like I mentioned previously, I have quite a social conscience, and I try to live quite sustainably, especially in terms of my fashion. And that's why I really do look for local brands. I buy thrifted clothes, I buy from little local thrift stores online, that type of thing. And what makes those brands very memorable is the packaging, okay? Because they are promoting in their messaging that they're sustainable. But then when you get now this package, it comes in like recycled box, everything can be recycled, thrown away. So they've been very conscious about how they're delivering. My worst is unwrapping 5 layers of plastic to get to one little product. I can't stand that. So that really bugs me, and that will turn me off completely, because I'm kind of like, we've moved away from that. Why are you still packaging your things like that? Even the smallest thing of like a tiny little Smarties box, on there, it's got a little thing like, I'm recyclable, throw me away. It's so small. And that's also teaching kids, that whole concept of recycling and stuff. And then I think what really does make a brand very memorable to me is the full experience. And I think Theo was saying, just in terms of their care project that they're doing now with the school shoes, that's tapping into consumers. And it links back to what I said earlier about brands being in touch with young people's circumstances right now. Because if you're a brand that's with me when things are really tough, you're not just coming at me for like, I'm another face with money in my hand. You're actually like there, and you're making an effort in the experience we have together. When things are better again, I am going to come back to you. I had an experience during lockdown where I bought my mom a necklace for her 60th birthday, and because of all the issues with deliveries and lockdown, the necklace got lost, and I contacted them and I just said, I don't know where it is. And they're a small local brand in Cape Town, and yet they went through the effort to send me a new one, apologies, and just that whole experience, I always go back to them, that type of thing. So I think it comes down to brands kind of remembering it's human to human, and treating their customers in that sense. With the social conscious messaging, again, very fine line, because I think young people and a lot of other people see straight through greenwashing. So I think brands need to be careful about pushing too much of that like social conscious messaging, and rather look at what am I doing? Because I think a lot of young people are going to do their homework on you. And if you are a big brand that's, like let's say a big fashion brand, i.e. Zara, who releases a sustainable clothing line, but then during COVID, they fire over 1,000 garment workers because they were protesting for more PPE. So do you see what I mean? I'm like, you're going to see straight through that. So that's brands that live that whole, if you're promoting social messaging and I can look at you and you're doing it, then you are memorable to me.
Totally understand what you mean about that, that authenticity in your ambitions. And Sia, I want to see if you can't help us maybe ground this a little bit. So there's been plenty said in the discussion around sustainability and some of these big global themes, right? Whether it be diversity, sustainability, looking after your employees. We're always, as South African brands, always kind of caught up in that. But also, we're the same country that will say, well, why should I care about the environment? I'm barely making ends meet. Right? So there's real tension between caring about some of these global motivators versus the reality that's kind of facing South Africans today. So I wonder if, in your experience, and this is partly, I want to touch on a question that someone's shared in the discussion. In your experience, what's the extent to which the closeness to some of these global trends helps to manage the perception between being a local brand versus being a global brand that just happens to come from South Africa? Is there any benefit to deliberately dialing those things up?
Yeah, there is quite a big benefit for being a proudly South African company and telling that story and that narrative. And I think there's also uniqueness in all these global problems that we're having. So whether and I think it resonates differently to different people. But that's where my initial discussion on consistency is very key, and what Sky is touching on, that important to be consistent in your values as a brand. You stand by those values and communicate those values. It becomes received very well by the consumer. So with regards to from a South African perspective, job losses and job creation is a big element to it. So the impact of a consumer's purchase decision resonates with most South African consumers. So the question is, how do you educate consumers to become more aware of the impact of their purchase decision? So if they know that if a South African product costs R5 more, how far does that R5 more go to job creation, to the infrastructure build in the country? Because the fact of the matter is that without Theo hiring 80 people in, for example, in his factory, those 80 people feed on average about five family members. That there's a spin-off of these importance of having these brands stay alive. There's importance of, like, with regards to the textile industry, there's a lot of job losses because people were importing. There's I've had a discussion with Laduma, with Makosa, and he says it would be easier for him to import his garments, but it would take away from an authentic South African story, the South African narrative. He wouldn't be Makosa if it's imported from China. It needs to be a South African story, but also not just that, but the job elements and how many people are in his factory manufacturing these garments and clothes. That is what consumers need to start getting aware of and understanding, that I can impact my future. Because, for example, if I'm a student and I'm supporting and we're speaking to the youth here, so if I'm a student and I'm supporting local brands, these local brands grow. If these local brands grow, they then in turn hire the same students that are coming through the value chain of schooling and so forth. So it's very important at the end of the day for consumers to think about a long-term approach, and just as a country where the brands as well as the consumers to think long-term in the impact that they want to have. And same with the environment. If if you know that if I impact the environment, or if I support brands that are not supporting the environment, at the end of the day, long term, short term, you might think it doesn't affect you, but long term, the impact is felt. And I think that's why I'm very passionate about the job unemployment rates in this country, that we need to find solutions, and we need to be also part of the solutions. I'm part of the solutions to the problems that we have. So if I can't do much, I might not have a business, I might not be an entrepreneur, but the little that I can do is support a Makosa, is support a South African production. So whether it's a TV series and whatnot. So there's Showmax, they're showing South African programs, and support South African music. There's so many content derived stuff in every sector that you can do a little bit just to support them, and also change that. I know I'm using the word support, but change the narrative that if you're supporting something, you're doing them a favor, but you're actually buying a good quality product. So let's not have that mindset. As much as I'm using the word support, let's not have that mindset that if I am buying, for example, Theo's Batushu, I'm shaming purchasing something. I'm not. I'm buying a product that is a quality product that I believe in, and so forth. So those are the kind of thinking and narratives. And I think the brand messaging is important in that element, but also the consumer education. I think we need to understand as brands that we need to educate the consumers of the importance of job creation, the importance of the environment, and so forth. And all these elements should be messaged across in our activities as brands.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true. I wonder if, because I think we're getting to some of the discussion about what shapes South Africanness, right? The deliberate nature in which we bring things like job creation to the fore of our choices about how we create our brands, use them as part of the justification of the pricing, why we source, where we source. I wonder, Theo, if maybe you can lean on this a little bit. Is when I think about some of the world's biggest kind of country brands that are very clear, right? You think of the Germans and you're very clear about the efficiency and the engineering. And that's very well demonstrated in the way that they manage the car industry, for example. Then you think about the French and you think luxury and opulence, and absolutely between the fashion and the food industry, they kind of really led the way with that. But typically the way that those countries' brands get defined is from a sum of the parts, right? It's multiple individuals doing something within a similar space and they become the reputation. Do you think that would be the right strategy for us, or should we be looking to deliberately collaborate? Should South African brands be working more intentionally together to create a South African narrative, or do we rely on Tsepo plus Makosa plus Batu plus different brands kind of doing their own individual things and trusting that somehow that halo will equal to a South African?
Great question, Zama. I think, in my opinion, I think it's a bit of both. We cannot afford to work in silos, especially during these times. But equally so, in the same breath, I think there's also power in just, taking, I think, a message or a heritage and running with it, like the way Latuma is doing with Makosa, and many of us, in our own respective industries. But I think, the beauty about, Africa as a whole is that we are a continent that is, filled with, that is known to be filled with so much heritage, different ways of talking, different ways of dressing, different ways of eating. We can even double tap and take it down to South Africa, our beautiful Rainbow Nation by Utata Mandela and our leaders. There's 11 official languages in Zulu alone. There's different ways of speaking Zulu depending on whether they're from Umlazi or from Soweto and so much. So there's so much heritage that can be embodied, into either ecosystems, into value chain, into product and service offerings that we can expose to the rest of the world. There's a hashtag that goes on social media that says, Africa, your time is now. And it is our time, because you look at how the world is really receiving, Africa, from, your Trevors, to your Tuzon Bedus, to your Master KGs and so forth. The world is really looking forward to hear from Africa and consume what Africa is capable of doing. And we can even take it further to many other sectors, And I think because there's so much heritage, it's like we've got so much to build on that is authentically ours. And we can really shape how to put it out there in terms of quality, service delivery, and many other things. So, it's a bit of both in a sense that because we've got so much that we can build on, it's important for us to collaborate. And when I mean collaborate with the Kenyans, collaborate with Nigerians, collaborate with the Zimbabweans, and collaborate we as, South Africans. And if there's a way of really leading, a heritage or leading a product or service offering to the world as an individual, and, I think communicating it proudly as an African, narrative, an African brand, why not do it, And then you've got your Africans and the rest of the world to support you in that regard. But the most important thing, I think it's really important, I can't stress it enough to say, Africa, we've been at the receiving end for far too long. The receiving end of the latest app, the latest technology, the latest brand, the latest, product that is, pushed to us as Africans. It's about time that we as Africans, we take our heritage, we embody it into, or we incorporate it into ecosystems, into value chains and product and service offerings that we can export to the world, and we can do it either in collaboration or, by just, pushing a certain mandate or running a certain mandate, and pushing it out to the rest of the world. But however, I think together we can do more, and there's no right way or wrong way of doing it. In collaboration, I think the beauty about collaboration is that it allows you to tap into an audience, into a network, that you probably wouldn't have had if you were doing it on your own. A typical example with a proudly African beer that we collaborated with from ABN Bev, Castle Light. About 11 countries, guys in Botswana said, hey, the exact same collaboration that you guys have in South Africa, we don't want to change anything, we want it here. Tanzania did the same thing, Swaziland did the same thing, and then through that collaboration, we managed to find and export Batu shoes in those countries, so there's different ways of doing it. And I think there's no right way or wrong way of doing it. But, it's important as well to collaborate in our approach.
I get you. Right. So I really want to get to these questions that are coming through in the chat discussion, because I think they're asking some of the things that maybe I would have held back on, but I think are the real things we've got to get to. So a question from Stacey that I'm hoping perhaps Sia, you can help us tackle a little bit, so there's a real tension around this idea of local brands being incredibly expensive, right? And we can't get around that. There's always some way, shape or form a premium that comes with buying local, and we understand the scales and the economies that sit behind why that is. But what Stacey's just asking is, could there be a few inexpensive ways to buy local businesses or local brands? What are the ways that we're helping South Africans to act on that beyond shame, right? To choose a South African product and to feel confident in it without necessarily having to pretend as though they have more money than they actually do. Do you have any insights into how we could get around that?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. To answer this question is, for me, it needs to go back to the psychology. I think the biggest issue we have here is a psychology of comparing apples and oranges. So, for example, people would say it might cost us expensive because they're comparing it with a low-end garment, whereas this is a high-end. If you compare it to like a Gucci, it's cheaper and more affordable. So to the right target audience, these brands are not more expensive. We just need to change the perception that we have of local brands and the understanding of what is a local brand. Local brands are not just craft stores and beads and whatnot. I think that's where the assumption of this is expensive and whatnot comes from, is the thinking that there's and I think in marketing, we all know there's target audience and target markets. Different brands target a different audience. And for that particular target audience, that brand sits rightly priced. And so we need to figure out, first of all, do we understand what the brand stands for and why the cost, what's behind the costing of that brand, before we just say, okay, these things. And I think that's the common assumption, that local brands are expensive, but there's a lot of local brands. Casa Lager is a local brand. There's I don't know, like there's so many different, whether from clothing and from textiles, pharmaceuticals. There's Portia M Cosmetics is a local brand, and if you look at it, it's competitively priced. If you go around your Spars and your Dis-Chems and your Pick n Pays, you'll see a lot of local brands. It's just the assumption people don't know that they are local. For example, for one of our member companies, Nestle, Bar One is a local brand. You'll see the Proudly SA logo on that. There's Kit Kat. So no one is saying Kit Kat is expensive, because the assumption is that it's international, and then why? So that we need to change the idea that when we celebrate when an international product is expensive, but we look down when a South African product is expensive. Are we saying the value of our employees in this country is not worthy of increasing the cost of a product? And that's my thing. You need to look at the psychology of it and say, look, people, if the product is expensive, it might be crafted expensively. The material that you're using might be of a high end, and that justifies the value. If we look at international brands, we'll realize there's quite a lot of international brands that are highly priced, but we're quick to justify why Louis Vuitton should cost many thousands, but we can't justify why a South African product should cost the value that it's put on. And instead of finding out research, I think more research is needed to find out what material is it made out of, where is it manufactured, how many people do they employ. All those factors impact on the cost of something. But another thing which plays a role into consumers is that the more we buy of a product, the cheaper it is to manufacture. If someone is an SMME and he's starting up and he's doing low numbers, his price of production will be higher than a multinational doing millions of units. So considerations in those kind of elements, and then the understanding that we as a country, we're growing, we're a developing country, and we might need to put a little bit more investment in our local brands so that they can also be multinational brands and have lower costs and then do economies of scale. So that understanding is very important when we look at pricing strategies of different brands.
I totally get you. I feel like we need our own "It's Worth It" campaign, right? We need to L'Oreal ourselves. Because I think there is something to be said, right, for feeling good about making a purchase without needing to thoroughly research it, right? I buy something, I feel like it's worth my money. And there's probably a conversation well worth having with brands, right? And as people who are making the decisions about the pricing, is how are we helping South Africans see the value in what you're selling? Because sometimes I get nervous when the response from consumers is this is too expensive, and our response is you just don't know why it's expensive, right? I think we've got to find a way to kind of, as an industry of brands, as a collection of people who are responsible to taking things to people, to make that easier, to help people understand how it is that these things are shaped. When I think about the way that global brands in their own local markets function, they often are actually a mass brand. If you look at a global brand like Heineken, it's actually the everyman's beer in the Netherlands, but actually around the world it becomes a premium. And I think that those are some of the things that perhaps we need to start looking at. So my last question, and I really just want to throw this to Mike, because I'm hoping that you can help us, because we're trying to address an audience of people who are responsible for shaping this, is just to what extent we are, as brand people, in control of shaping the narrative. Do we actually go about deliberately defining what South Africanness looks like, or do we wait for South Africans to show us what they want to see and then play that back to them?
It's a two-way street, really. I mean, it's like life imitating art, or does art imitate life? And I think that the reality is that we produce some of the most remarkable creative in the world. And I mean, it's featured time and time again on like Cannes, and recently having won the best documentary at the Oscars. Like, these are very huge achievements. And even though that was a weird story, I mean, I think the reality is that we have the ability to engage with consumers when we don't force our way into the conversation, but rather look at the trend and how we can become symbiotic within that space. And I mean, the reason why I use my octopus teacher is like, we had the ability to really jump onto that trend, and we created a spoof called My Creepy Teacher, which is around the guy who swims in his pool with his creepy crawly every day. South African invention, good timing in terms of spoofing a globally spoken about piece of content across Netflix, and that did incredibly well for the brand. And I think that's ultimately it. It's like, someone used that analogy years and years ago about being at a braai. You're not going to be the person that literally walks up to a stranger and just starts talking at them. But some brands are like that. Some of them are broadcasting their message with tone deafness and not a clear understanding of the channels in which they can operate. But ultimately, if you have the ability to act like a human, like, that's where you as a brand have the best opportunities to succeed. At the end of last year, we worked with First for Women, and we created a top 40 track around 16 days of activism. We worked with Lyra, we worked with Marishan, Gigi Lemaine, Juliet Harding. And the best part of that campaign was not the fact that the song was actually playlisted on 27 radio stations around the country. The fact was that it created a trend within this TikTok environment. TikTok was the largest growing platform across South Africa in lockdown. And people were creating their own music videos and standing up and saying why they are anti-GBV. And it allowed that platform with the music capabilities to add as an extra layer of dissemination. And then we had about 800 odd South Africans creating their own music videos with our audio source as the entry point. And I think that's where culture and advertising and humans need to intersect in a way that the brand doesn't feel intrusive or invasive, but collaborative and supportive. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you very much, Mike. To close us out, and part of my responsibility is to get all of you up and out in here within the hour. Sia, perhaps your final closing statement is, whose onus is it to help us kind of navigate these discussions? Is it on young people to kind of move the needle towards in favor of local brands, or is it your job to be done?
I think it's a collective effort of all of us now being responsible for our future. I think as young people, it's time to take our future and put it in our hands. And that's through when we're and play every role of the value chain to the best of our ability. We are one team with one common goal. I think South Africa needs to start creating a common goal that this is what is being South African. This is what it means to be South African. This is what our goal for our country is. And we all play our role in that goal. So if it means that we need entrepreneurs like Theo to start a business, we need as consumers like Siyabonga to buy that product. We need people who are influencers on social media to engage about and positively reinforce the message of being proud to be South African and being proud to purchase something locally. We need to start changing our culture in a direction that says, we are South African, we're proud to be South African, and we're happy to represent and be part of the journey that we want to be in. So it really is an onus of all of us. We collectively need to work together. Collaboration is very important in this time. We need to all play our part in making sure that jobs are created, that we're buying local, that we know what South African local brands are. We know the symbol of proudly South African and say, I want to buy this product because it's a proudly South African product. It's got the mark there. And if when I see a product that's made in South Africa, I'm not only buying a good quality product, but I'm creating a job and I'm reinvesting in the economy that I want to be part of. So the onus is on us as a whole, and I always say people change their hats as their day goes by. As I'm Siyabonga from Proudly South African during the day while I'm working, and I'm pushing the narrative that we need to buy local, but I don't stop becoming Proudly South African when I get home and I'm a consumer and I have to do shopping for my family and I have to buy clothes and so forth. So we need to continuously not have an act when we're at work and say, I love local at work, but I don't love local when I'm at home. We need to watch local shows. We need to play local music, everything that we can celebrate. And then also don't wait. I think, and just in closing, let's not wait to be, I know because of lockdown, people haven't traveled a lot, but what we've seen is that when people are overseas, they're very proudly South African, but they're very negative when they're in the country, when they're in South Africa. Let's have that energy consistently, that whether I'm overseas or whether I'm in South Africa, I'm proud to be South African. I'm proud to purchase locally. I don't just say it, but I act it, and then live it through our brands and our consumers and everybody involved in the value chain.
Thank you so much, everyone. See, I think you're absolutely right. For me, the biggest message would probably be just get involved, right? We're on a track here, and I think someone always says to me, never waste a good crisis. And I think as South Africa, we are well poised to make very good use of the crisis that we're currently going through. So thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. I greatly appreciate them. It's given me some real food for thought. I wish you all the best. And please stay in touch. And anyone, feel free to reach out to any of the panelists on Twitter and any of the social media platforms. Should you have any follow-up questions, I know that we certainly are very vested in having this discussion. So thank you all very much for your time, and we'll chat to you at the next one.